America's national parks hold over 84 million acres of pristine wilderness. For most, they offer the perfect escape. But for a tragic few, they become a permanent trap. Today, we're covering the 10 most mysterious national park disappearances in history. These cases defy logic, leave zero trace, and fuel nightmares. If you love deep dives into the unexplained, please hit that subscribe button and give hype points. Now, stay on the trail and let's get into it. Okay, here's the puzzle I want you to solve with me. A bike is found leaning against a guardrail on the side of a remote park road, next to a roaring, icy river. The bike is fully loaded with camping gear, sleeping bag, tent, food, everything a person would need to survive in the wilderness. The rider is gone. For over a year, every search team, every investigator, every family member assumes the obvious. He slipped, he fell in the river, the water took him. It's tragic, but it makes sense. Then, 16 months later, a biology research crew finds his body. But not in the river, not downstream, not pinned under rocks in the water. They find him over 15 miles away, at an elevation of 5,300 feet on a snow-covered mountain ridge, with a lighter in his pocket that he never used, wearing shoes completely wrong for where he ended up. This is the case of Jacob Gray, and to this day, nobody can explain how he got from the bike to the mountain. Let's set this up properly, because the geography here is absolutely essential to understanding how strange this case gets. Olympic National Park is in the far northwestern corner of Washington State, out on the Olympic Peninsula. And this park is genuinely one of the most ecologically diverse places in the United States. You have 3 completely different landscapes stacked on top of each other. At the lowest elevations, you've got the temperate rainforest. This is that mossy, primeval, almost prehistoric world of towering Sitka spruce and western hemlock, everything dripping wet, ferns the size of dinner tables, the ground a tangle of fallen logs and thick undergrowth. Rivers like the Sol Duc cut through these valleys, fed by snowmelt, freezing cold, moving fast. Then, you get into the mid-elevation old-growth forest, dense, dark, hard to navigate, and above that, at the highest elevations, you hit alpine country. Treeless ridges, steep scree slopes, deep snowpack that lingers well into summer. And in April 2017, which is when our story starts, all 3 of these zones are extra dangerous. The lowlands are cold and soaked. The mid-elevations are muddy and thick with deadfall. The alpine country is still locked in deep winter. Avalanche risk is real. Hypothermia is real. Nobody with any sense is summiting anything up there in street clothes. Now, Jacob Gray, 22 years old, 5'11", 145 pounds, really fit. Jacob was an athlete, competitive cyclist, avid surfer, carpenter by trade, and he was studying to become an EMT. His family described him as someone with serious wilderness skills, a guy who knew how to survive outdoors, who was smart about gear, who respected nature. And in April 2017, Jacob was in the middle of an ambitious journey. He was doing a solo cross-country bicycle trip from Washington State all the way across the country to Vermont to visit his brother. Just him and his bike and a small trailer of gear pulled behind it. That's a seriously impressive undertaking. That requires planning, endurance, grit. And that's what makes everything that happens next so profoundly weird. On the evening of April 5th, 2017, Jacob is at home in Port Townsend. He tells his friends that he's setting off on his long journey. He's heading east, toward Vermont, toward his brother. But here's the first thing that doesn't make sense. He doesn't go east, he goes west. Instead of heading toward the mainland United States, Jacob cycles into the Olympic Peninsula, further away from Vermont, deeper into remote wilderness, away from civilization, away from his stated plan, away from everyone who loves him. The next afternoon, April 6th, 2017, a park ranger is patrolling Sol Duc Hot Springs Road inside Olympic National Park. Around milepost 6.3, the ranger notices something odd. A bicycle, sitting about 40 feet off the road in the brush, not far from the rushing Sol Duc River. The ranger gets closer. The bike is fully loaded. The trailer behind it is packed tight with gear: sleeping bag, tent, food, water, supplies for weeks on the road. But the setup is weird. The bike isn't locked. It's just sitting there, basically in plain sight with thousands of dollars of gear on it. That alone is strange. Cyclists lock their bikes. They don't just abandon them accessible to anyone walking by. But it gets stranger. Lying on the ground near the bike is a bow, like an archery bow, and nearby, several arrows are stuck vertically into the dirt. Some reports describe them as being arranged almost deliberately, protruding from the back of the bike trailer. That's not how you store arrows. That's not how you leave arrows when you step away for a minute. That arrangement is ritualistic or defensive or something. But it's not how a rational person secures archery equipment. The ranger calls it in. Hours pass. The ranger checks back. The bike is still there, still abandoned. No Jacob. The Park Service launches a major search operation. Given the setup, bike by the river, obvious staging suggesting he'd stepped away, everyone assumes the worst. Jacob got too close to the freezing Salduc River, slipped down the embankment, fell in. The current swept him downstream. He drowned. Dog teams come in. Swift water dive teams work the river. Olympic mountain rescue coordinates with volunteer search teams. They grid the river corridor. They walk the banks. They peer into every pool. Months pass. Nothing. No body. No clothing. No gear fragments. The Salduc River keeps its secret. Then, 16 months later, August 10th, 2018. A biology field crew is up in the high country of Olympic National Park doing marmot research near Ho Lake. They stumble across outdoor equipment and human remains. It's Jacob. But here's where the entire official theory blows apart. Jacob's body isn't in the river. It isn't downstream from where he left his bike. It isn't even at low elevation. Jacob's remains are on a treeless alpine ridge at 5,300 feet of elevation. That's roughly 15 miles from his bike, on the other side of the raging Salduc River, through miles of trackless, dense, old-growth forest, up a steep, snow-covered mountain, and the gear on his body. That's its own horror show. When searchers examine the scene, they find his wallet. They find insulated clothing, plenty of food, and a functioning cigarette lighter. He died of exposure, most likely hypothermia, with warm clothes, food, and a working lighter on him. Oh, and one more thing. When investigators later pieced together the scene at the bicycle, they found evidence that before Jacob started walking toward the river, he had taken off his hiking boots and swapped them for lightweight running shoes. Okay, deep breath. Let's try to make this make sense, because every single element of this case contradicts every other element. The original theory was a drowning in the Salduc River. That one got destroyed by the location of the body. So let's look at what actually happened and try to work the theories. Let's start with the footwear swap. Jacob apparently, sometime before leaving his bike, took off his sturdy hiking boots and put on running shoes. Think about how bizarre that is. You're about to hike into a freezing, snowy wilderness in April. Running shoes have zero traction on snow, zero insulation, zero ankle support. Hiking boots are literally the entire point of having hiking boots. They protect you in exactly this scenario. Jacob swapped his safer, warmer, more protective footwear for the worst possible option before starting the hardest physical journey of his life. That's not a rational decision. That's not what an athletic, outdoors-savvy 22-year-old does when he's thinking clearly. Next, the gear. Jacob left everything behind: his sleeping bag, his tent, his main food stores, his heavy layers, everything a long-distance cyclist carries to survive outdoor conditions. And here's the thing. He didn't forget it. He didn't leave in a panic without thinking. He chose to leave it because his wallet, some food, and his lighter were on him when he was found. He took a subset of stuff. He just didn't take the stuff that would have kept him alive. Why would you do that? If you are a person with wilderness experience and you're about to embark on a brutal alpine hike, you take your shelter. You take your warm layers. You take your full kit. The only scenario in which a rational person leaves their sleeping bag behind is if they're going for a short walk and planning to come right back. But Jacob didn't come back. Jacob walked 15 miles, up a mountain, in running shoes. Now let's talk about the distance, because this is the part that really breaks the brain. 15 miles from the bike to the body. That's not a casual wander. That's a massive undertaking, and the terrain between those 2 points is absolutely unforgiving. First, Jacob would have had to cross the Sol Duc River in April, when the water is icy and running hard from snowmelt, in running shoes. Without any kind of dry bag or protective gear, you don't wade across a river like that without potentially going into hypothermic shock from the cold water alone. Then, miles of dense, trackless, old-growth forest, no trails, fallen logs everywhere, thick undergrowth, constant obstacles. Moving through that kind of environment is physically exhausting. Your shins take a beating. You have to climb over huge dead trunks. You have to push through brush, mile after mile of it. And then, the kicker. A steep, snow-covered alpine ascent, in April, to 5,300 feet, in running shoes, through terrain that was actively avalanche-prone. That's a climb that a prepared mountaineer with crampons, an ice axe, and proper boots would approach with caution. How does a 22-year-old in running shoes make that climb without slipping, without falling, without getting caught in a slide? And more importantly, why did he make that climb? He had a lighter. When he got up there, when the cold started taking him, he had the means to build a fire. He was surrounded by some form of vegetation, even at alpine elevations. He could have tried to warm himself. He could have tried to signal for help. He had the tools. He didn't use them. He just lay down and froze. The coroner ruled out malicious trauma. There were no signs that anyone else had been involved in his death. The official cause of death was probable hypothermia, and the official explanation for everything else has become some version of a psychological crisis. The theory goes something like this. Jacob suffered a sudden mental health break, maybe triggered by stress, maybe by something biological, maybe by ingesting something. He went into a state that might have involved paranoia or a spiritual journey of some kind. He suddenly changed direction, heading west instead of east. He abandoned his bike in a way that felt almost ceremonial. The arrows staked in the dirt, the bow laid out. He swapped his boots for running shoes, for reasons only he understood. And then he walked up a mountain until his body gave out. I want to be careful here. A psychotic break is a real thing, and it absolutely can cause people to do exactly these kinds of irrational, self-destructive acts. I'm not dismissing that theory. It fits the pattern of behavior better than any other explanation. But the physical accomplishment is the part that bothers me. Even during a severe mental health crisis, the body still has limits. Crossing a freezing river, forcing through miles of nearly impassable forest, and ascending thousands of feet of snowy terrain in the wrong shoes is a staggering physical feat. It requires sustained motivation, sustained energy, sustained forward momentum. What sustained him? Where was he going? What was he running to or running from? That's the question nobody has been able to answer, and probably never will. For Jacob Gray's family, the 2018 discovery of his remains did something that matters a lot. It gave them closure. They got their son back. They were able to bring him home, mourn him, bury him. For months leading up to the discovery, his father had actually been out in Olympic National Park himself, searching, sometimes with spiritual guides, and the fact that the body was eventually found did mean the uncertainty ended. But finding Jacob didn't answer what happened to him. If anything, it made everything harder to understand. Because now investigators had to explain not just a missing person, but a physically impossible journey that ended with a fully equipped young man freezing to death next to a lighter he never lit. The Jacob Gray case has since become kind of a touchstone in high-strangeness wilderness research. It's the case that people point to when they want to ask the question, what makes a perfectly sensible person do something completely insensible? And honestly, the image I can't shake is the start of it. That fully loaded bicycle, leaning against a guardrail on a misty April morning in the Pacific Northwest. Everything Jacob needed to survive was right there. Tent, sleeping bag, food, water, warm clothes, sturdy boots. And Jacob, for reasons he took with him, left all of it behind. Took off his boots, put on his running shoes, and started walking. Up, 15 miles up and into the snow until the mountain finally stopped him. Okay, let me set the scene for you. A 10-year-old boy is fishing with his friends at a summer camp creek in the Colorado Rockies. He's having fun. He's wearing everyday kid clothes. He's practically deaf, so he's carrying around a heavy 1950s hearing aid strapped to his chest like a harness. It's the only way he can hear the world around him. The dinner bell rings. The group packs up. They start the short walk back to the camp dining hall. Bobby is right there with them. Somewhere along that walk, a walk that should take maybe 5 minutes, Bobby simply isn't there anymore. He doesn't make it to dinner. He doesn't come back at all. 1 full year later, climbers find his remains high up the side of a 13,911-foot mountain, 3 miles of brutal near-vertical terrain from the camp. And the question everyone has been asking for almost 70 years is this: how in the world did a hungry, deaf 10-year-old boy climb a mountain that challenges trained adult mountaineers? And more importantly, why? Welcome to the case of Bobby Bizup, one of the strangest and, frankly, most disturbing missing persons cases in American history. Let's set this up properly, because you need to understand both the geography and the atmosphere to grasp how impossible this case is. We're in August 1958, Colorado. The setting is Camp St. Malo, a Catholic summer camp for boys, tucked right up against the southeastern edge of Rocky Mountain National Park, near the town of Allens Park. Picture the idyllic vision of a 1950s summer camp. Wooden cabins, a dining hall, a chapel, fishing creeks, boys running around in Boy Scout-style uniforms, laughing, playing, learning about the outdoors. That's the surface. That's what it looked like. And looming over all of it, literally casting a shadow over the entire camp, is Mount Meeker. And Mount Meeker is no joke. This is a 13,911-foot monster of a peak, jagged, brutal. The terrain going up Meeker starts with thick, disorienting pine forest at the base. Then, as you climb, the trees thin out and you hit steep, rocky scree fields, those loose piles of sharp-edged rock that shift and slide under your feet. Then, deep ravines. Then, near vertical faces that even experienced climbers approach carefully. Near the tree line, around 11,000 feet, you're in a zone where summer afternoons can bring sudden, violent thunderstorms, and temperatures can drop near freezing overnight. So that's the geography. Fun summer camp in a pretty valley. Monster of a mountain right next door. Now, Bobby Bizup, Robert Bizup, 10 years old, from Denver's Park Hill neighborhood. Family described him as always smiling, a joyful kid with a bit of a mischievous streak. But Bobby had a significant challenge. He had been almost entirely deaf since birth. To function in the world, he depended on a bulky 1950s-era hearing aid. This was not a small earpiece like you'd see today. This was a heavy Zenith device with a battery pack that had to be strapped to his chest like a little harness. He also read lips and used some basic sign language. Without that hearing aid, he couldn't hear a conversation, couldn't hear an adult calling his name, couldn't hear the approach of an animal, couldn't hear rockfall, couldn't hear the weather shifting. That vulnerability matters a lot in this case. Hold on to it. By August 1958, Bobby was actually in his second stint at Camp St. Malo that summer. He was comfortable. He knew the counselors. He knew the grounds. He was happy to be there. August 15th, 1958, late afternoon. Bobby is fishing with a group of campers and their counselors at Cabin Creek, a small, shallow fishing spot just a short walk from the main camp buildings. Totally normal camp activity. Kids with fishing poles, probably laughing, probably muddy. The dinner bell rings. Time to head back for dinner. The group packs up their gear. They start the short walk back to the dining hall. We're talking a very brief distance, minutes. And somewhere on that walk, Bobby disappears. Now, there's another, slightly different version of this day that investigators have focused on. Some sources say the last person who saw Bobby alive was a counselor named Neil Hewitt. According to this account, Bobby had gone to the camp snack bar to ask for candy. Hewitt refused, wouldn't give Bobby more sweets, and Bobby, reportedly frustrated, just took off, turned around and walked away. Either way, whether he wandered off on the walk back from fishing or stormed away from the snack bar, Bobby doesn't show up to dinner that night. Counselors notice. They start calling for him, and the panic sets in fast. A massive search kicks off almost immediately. Camp counselors, local police, volunteers from nearby Allens Park. They sweep the forests around camp, they drag Cabin Creek, they check every cabin, every outhouse, every nook of the grounds. The search expands outward into the thick forest around the camp, up the lower slopes of the mountains nearby. They find nothing. Not a footprint, not a torn piece of clothing, not the hearing aid, not Bobby. Weeks of searching turn up nothing. Eventually, the search is scaled back. Bobby Bizup is officially missing. Then, fast forward almost exactly 1 year. July 1959. A group of campers from Camp St. Malo is out on a guided hike high up on the slopes of Mount Meeker. They're at around 11,000 feet of elevation, tree line, brutal, jagged terrain, and they stumble onto something. Human remains, fragments of clothing, a Boy Scout knife. Dental records confirm it. It's Bobby. Now, here's where the case stops being a tragedy and starts becoming something much, much darker. Okay, let's do what we do. Let's pull this apart with logic. The official story, the one authorities settled on back in 1959, is the simplest explanation. Bobby got upset about the candy. He wandered into the woods. He got lost. He kept walking. He somehow made it up the slopes of Mount Meeker. He died of exposure. Animal scavengers subsequently scattered his remains over the course of the year. On the surface, it's a sad, straightforward wilderness tragedy. Kid gets lost, kid dies in the mountains. It happens. But let's look at the facts. First, the climb itself. Bobby's remains were found at roughly 11,000 feet of elevation on the rugged, treacherous flanks of Mount Meeker. We are not talking about a gentle nature trail. This is a section of mountain that requires steep hiking, rock scrambling, and real physical endurance. For an experienced adult hiker in hiking boots with a day pack, this ascent from the camp area is a multi-hour grind, possibly more. It's the kind of climb where you stop, you catch your breath, you reassess your route, you drink water. How does a 10-year-old boy in casual camp clothes make this climb? A kid, 10 years old, in the kind of shoes a 1958 summer camper was wearing, which were definitely not mountaineering boots, without proper clothing for high altitude, without water, without food, without navigation. Even the most athletic 10-year-old in the world doesn't have the cardiovascular stamina or physical development to ascend that kind of terrain alone. A kid's legs burn out. They hit a wall, they sit down. The idea that Bobby kept climbing upward for hours without stopping, without turning back, it's genuinely not how child bodies work. Second, the motivation. Let's say for a moment that Bobby could make that climb. Why would he? He was a kid. He was hungry. The dinner bell had just rung. He was on his way back to a known, safe dining hall where his friends were sitting down to eat. Even if he was annoyed about the candy being refused, the rational, normal response for a 10-year-old is to sulk, eat dinner, and be fine by breakfast. Not to turn around, walk away from camp, trek 3 miles across rough terrain, and begin a grueling vertical ascent up a freezing mountain as the sun goes down. Think about it. What 10-year-old, upset because an adult wouldn't give him candy, responds by climbing a 13,000-foot mountain? That's not throwing a tantrum. That's not running away. That's not behavior that kids exhibit. Third, the missing hearing aid. This, for me, is the single most disturbing detail. Bobby was profoundly deaf. Without the Zenith hearing aid and the chest harness, he effectively could not hear anything. He could not hear someone calling his name. He could not hear warning signs. He could not hear rocks sliding underfoot. He could not hear himself breathing hard from altitude. When his remains were found on Mount Meeker in 1959, the hearing aid itself was not recovered in the condition you'd expect. Now, reports on this vary. A Zenith hearing aid battery was reportedly found at some point, but not the full device or harness in obvious form. So what happened to it? Did Bobby take the hearing aid off? A kid who depends on that device for his entire connection to the audible world doesn't just take it off and toss it aside before starting a mountain climb. That makes no sense. Did it fall off during the ascent? A bulky chest harness doesn't just slip off on its own. Did someone else take it off him? Because here's where we have to start being honest about this case. For over 60 years, Bobby's case was officially a tragic wilderness accident. But in recent years, things have come out that have completely changed how people look at what happened at Camp St. Malo. In 2020 and 2021, a massive Colorado Attorney General investigation into Catholic church abuse revealed that Camp St. Malo was a center of systemic child sexual abuse in the 1950s and beyond. Multiple people associated with the camp, including the camp's founder, Father Bossetti, and a counselor named Harold Robert White, and yes, Neil Hewitt, the same Neil Hewitt who was the last person to see Bobby alive at the snack bar, were credibly accused of molesting children. All three were eventually defrocked. And here's the part that'll genuinely chill you. In 2021, a Denver man named Dr. Tom McCloskey turned over a human skull to authorities, a skull that had been sitting in his basement in a paper sack since 1982. He said the skull had been given to his father by Reverend Richard Heister, who just happened to be the director of Camp St. Malo at the time Bobby Bizup disappeared. So here's the timeline that's emerging. Bobby's torso bones, his ribs, his scapula, his vertebrae, and his clothing were reportedly found on Mount Meeker in 1959. But his skull was conspicuously missing from that discovery. Instead, a skull that may be Bobby's appears to have been kept by the camp director as, I don't even have a word for it, a trophy, a memento, a piece of evidence he wanted to control. And then, there's this additional, almost absurd detail. The group of counselors that found Bobby's remains on the mountain in 1959 was led by Neil Hewitt, the same counselor who was the last person to see Bobby alive at the snack bar, in an area that had reportedly already been searched the previous year. The circumstantial picture this paints is staggering, and it points to one very dark theory that has been gaining ground in recent years, that Bobby Bizup never climbed Mount Meeker at all, that he was sexually abused and murdered by staff at Camp St. Malo, that his body was hidden somewhere for a year, that some of his remains were then carried up the mountain and strategically staged to look like a wilderness exposure death, that the discovery was engineered by the very people responsible for his disappearance. That theory doesn't require a deaf 10-year-old to climb a mountain in his tennis shoes. It explains the missing hearing aid. He wasn't wearing it because he never climbed the mountain. It explains why the camp director was secretly holding a skull in private for decades. It explains why the people discovering the body were the same people last seen with Bobby alive. To this day, Bobby Bizup's case sits in a weird limbo. Officially, his manner of death is still listed as accidental, lost in the wilderness, succumbed to exposure. That was the story for over 60 years, and that's still the story on most of the original paperwork. But in the light of everything we've learned about Camp St. Malo in the past decade, that story has become deeply, deeply difficult to accept. Too many of the people closest to Bobby that day turned out to be credibly accused child predators. Too many weird details, the skull in a paper sack, the discovery led by the last person to see him alive, don't line up with a random wilderness accident. The awful truth is that we may never get a definitive answer. The main suspects are dead. The camp is closed. The evidence is largely gone. What we have are fragments, literally and figuratively, of a 10-year-old boy's last day. And the image I can't shake is the simplest one. A little deaf kid at the dinner bell, walking back to the dining hall for a meal. His friends around him, a hearing aid harness strapped to his chest. The smell of camp food drifting across the grounds, the last safe moment of his life. And somewhere between that creek and that dining hall, between one step and the next, something reached out and took him. Whether it was a mountain or something much worse wearing a counselor's uniform, Bobby Bizup never sat down to dinner. And the thing I keep coming back to is just this. Kids aren't supposed to climb mountains when the dinner bell rings. They're supposed to come home. Now imagine a 4-year-old boy, a little guy named Alfred, standing on those slick rocks with his dad. They're washing up before dinner. It's a perfect American summer holiday. And in the next few minutes, Alfred is going to disappear off the face of the earth. No splash, no scream, no trace. But here's the part that'll keep you up at night. The next time anyone claims to see him, he'll be standing on a cliff edge miles away, thousands of feet straight up, being watched by a shadowy man hiding behind a rock. This is the disappearance of Alfred Beilhartz, and almost 90 years later, nobody has any idea what really happened to him. So let's set the scene properly. It's July 2nd, 1938. The Great Depression is still hanging over the country like a gray cloud, but for one weekend, people are trying to forget. National parks are booming because they're cheap. You pack the family into the car, you drive out to the mountains, and for a few days, the world feels okay again. That's exactly what the Beilhartz family is doing. William Beilhartz has hauled his enormous family out from out of state. We're talking 11 children here. 11. Plus a whole extended group of family and friends. They're a small army of campers spreading out near the Fall River area of Rocky Mountain National Park, settling in for the holiday weekend. And the place is gorgeous, but it's deceptive. The Fall River area is right where the river meets the Roaring River, and the name is not an accident. These are fast, cold, snowmelt-fed waters churning over jagged granite, surrounded by dense, claustrophobic pine forest. Towering over the whole scene is Mount Chapin, a jagged, mean-looking peak with a feature near the top called the Devil's Nest, a sheer, exposed ledge thousands of feet up. Remember that name. It matters. Now, little Alfred is one of those 11 kids. He's somewhere between 3 and 4 years old. A toddler. The kind of kid who runs around on stubby little legs, gets distracted by every butterfly, and can't walk more than maybe a mile before his batteries run out. He has 0 wilderness skills, 0 survival instincts, 0 ability to regulate his body temperature at altitude. He's a toddler. That's the whole profile. So on the morning of July 2nd, the family is gearing up for a day of fishing over in the Estes Park region. And William, being a good dad, takes Alfred down to the edge of the Fall River to wash up before they eat. Now, this is where it gets strange. They walk down to the riverbank, dad and son. The water's thundering past. William bends down, does his thing, washes up. He turns his back. Maybe he takes a step or two. Maybe he's looking for the group. It is, at most, a matter of seconds. He turns around. Alfred is gone, and I want you to really sit with this for a second. Because here's the thing. If a 4-year-old falls into a roaring river, you hear it. There's a splash. There's a thrashing. There's a scream. Even over the sound of the water, a body hitting that current creates a disturbance that a parent standing 3 feet away is going to register on some primal level. But William, he hears nothing. No splash, no cry, no rustle of brush. Alfred simply ceases to occupy the space he was just in. Panic sets in immediately. The whole family starts screaming his name. They run up and down the bank. Nothing. Within hours, they've called in the authorities, and the park launches what has to be one of the most aggressive searches in its history up to that point. And I mean, aggressive. They bring in 150 workers from the Civilian Conservation Corps. These guys were the New Deal's answer to unemployment. Young men, fit, tough, experienced at working in rough terrain. They descend on the Fall River with grappling hooks and long pike poles. They walk the banks for miles. They drag every pool, every eddy, every snag. But they don't stop there. They actually divert the roaring river. They physically re-engineer the flow of a mountain river to lower the water level so they can examine the bed. And when that doesn't turn up anything, they go even further. They drain the Cascade Dam, which sits about 2 miles downstream. They empty an entire dam reservoir looking for this little boy's body. And what do they find? Nothing. Not a shoe, not a scrap of cloth, not a single biological trace. Then they bring in the bloodhounds. Not just any dogs, bloodhounds from the Colorado State Penitentiary. These are working dogs, trained to track fugitives through swamps and forests for miles. They pick up Alfred's scent. They follow it for 500 feet. And then it stops. Not fades, not gets confused. Stops, dead. As if Alfred walked 500 feet from the river and then was plucked straight up into the air. But the strangest part of this entire case? That's still coming. A few days into the search, a report comes in from a couple of hikers. They've been walking along Old Fall River Road, which snakes up the side of the mountains at a much higher elevation. Thousands of feet above where Alfred vanished, they claim they saw a small boy. He matched Alfred's description perfectly, Same size, same approximate age, same appearance. He was sitting on a boulder right on the edge of the ledge they call the Devil's Nest, just perched there, passive, staring out. And then, according to these hikers, something happened that turned this story from a tragedy into a full-blown nightmare. They said the boy was suddenly jerked back, violently, out of sight, pulled behind the rocks by someone, or something, that had been hiding just out of view. The hikers immediately reported what they'd seen. Park officials scrambled. They sent professional climbers up the cliff face to the exact location described. They searched the Devil's Nest. They searched the surrounding rocks. They searched every inch of that ledge, and they found nothing. No boy, no dark figure, no disturbance in the dust, no footprints, no torn clothing, no evidence that a human being of any size, child or adult, had ever been there. Okay, let's pump the brakes and actually think about this. Because the official theory, the one park authorities wanted to stick with, is the simplest one. Alfred slipped into the Fall River, drowned, and his tiny body got pinned somewhere beneath a log or a rock where they couldn't find him. And look, on the surface, that makes sense. A toddler near a fast river? Tragic things happen. I get it. But here's the thing. They dammed the river. They drained the Cascade Dam. 150 able-bodied men with grappling hooks went through that waterway inch by inch for days. If Alfred's body was in that river, they would have found him, or at least a piece of his clothing, a shoe, a button, something. Water carries debris. Clothing snags on rocks. Bodies get hung up on log jams. The idea that a 4-year-old boy and every single piece of fabric on his body got so perfectly hidden that an army couldn't find him in a drained, contained waterway? That stretches the laws of physics. So let's say, okay, he didn't drown. Fine, he wandered off. Now explain the dogs. Bloodhounds don't just lose a trail after 500 feet. That's not how scent tracking works. Skin cells, a thing called desquamation, are constantly shedding off a human body. It leaves a continuous trail. Unless something picked Alfred up and carried him, and I mean literally lifted him off the ground, that scent trail should have continued for miles. The fact that it just stops is the kind of thing that haunts professional trackers to this day. And then, let's talk about the Devil's Nest. Let's really talk about it, because the official response to that sighting has always been to kind of wave it off. Mistaken identity. Could have been another kid. Trick of the light. But come on. Let's look at the facts. The Devil's Nest is located thousands of feet in elevation above where Alfred was last seen, miles away. Up extremely rugged, steep terrain. We're talking about a climb that a fit adult hiker with proper boots, water, and experience would need hours to complete. How does a 4-year-old boy with toddler legs and zero stamina get up there? He doesn't. It's physically impossible. A child that age has a maximum unassisted travel radius of maybe a mile on flat ground. Up a near vertical mountainside? Forget it. So either the hikers were wrong, which, okay, is possible, or somebody carried him up there, which brings us to the dark figure. Who was that? Because if it was just a hiker or a rescuer, the behavior makes zero sense. You see a little kid on the edge of a cliff, you don't hide behind a rock and watch. You sprint over and grab him. You yell. You do anything other than lurk in the shadows, watching a toddler teeter over a 1,000-foot drop. And why did the boy get jerked back, violently, the second the hikers looked up and noticed him? That's not the action of someone helping a lost child. That's the action of someone who didn't want to be seen. By the time searchers got to that spot, both were gone. Vanished again. A few months later, in November of 1938, the family gets a ransom note. It turns out to be a hoax. Then somebody reports seeing a boy matching Alfred's description walking along a road in Nebraska, holding the hand of an unknown man. That sighting was never confirmed either. And that's it. That's everything. No one ever saw Alfred Beilhartz again, not alive, not in any recoverable form. His family searched for years. The park eventually closed the case. The river continued to roar through that canyon, indifferent to the whole thing. And today, if you drive through Rocky Mountain National Park on a nice summer weekend, you can see Mount Chapin looming over the valley. You can look up at the ridge. You can find the devil's nest if you know where to look. And I want to leave you with this picture. Imagine it's 1938. You're that hiking couple on Old Fall River Road. You look up through a gap in the pines, up a ridge so steep it should be impossible to climb, and you see a tiny shape, a small boy, alone on the edge of the world, and just behind him, in the shadow of a boulder, something is watching, and then they're both gone. Okay, I want you to try something with me. I want you to think about the last time you went for a walk with a friend, maybe a hiking trail, maybe just a path through the woods. Your friend is a few steps ahead of you. You're chatting. They round a bend. You lose sight of them for, 10 seconds? Maybe 15? Then you round that same bend. And they're gone. Not gone like they ran ahead. Gone like they never existed. The trail stretches straight and empty in front of you. The woods are silent, no footsteps, no rustling, no voice calling back to you, just nothing. That is exactly what happened on September 25th, 1981, on a beautiful autumn day, on one of the most popular and well-marked trails in the entire Great Smoky Mountains National Park. And the woman who vanished was a 58-year-old grandmother named Polly Melton. She walked over a small hill, and she never came back. She's still gone. Let's paint this picture properly, because the setting matters a lot. It's late September 1981. The Great Smoky Mountains are hitting peak season. The leaves are turning, the air is crisp, and the park is packed with families, retirees, and weekend hikers. We're not talking about some remote, brutal backcountry death trap here. The Deep Creek Trail is the opposite of that. It's a wide, forgiving, mostly flat path that winds alongside a gentle creek through dense Appalachian forest. People bring their kids on this trail. They bring their grandparents. Tubers float down the creek right next to it in the summer. It is, by every standard, a safe place. There are no sheer drop-offs, no hidden crevasses, no confusing mazes of unmarked forks. It's the kind of trail you take when you want a pleasant afternoon outside, not when you want to tempt fate. And that's exactly why Polly Melton was there. Polly was 58 years old, Tennessee woman, 5'10", about 180 pounds, red hair, brown eyes, glasses. She was not an athlete. She wasn't a backcountry survivalist. She took medication for high blood pressure. On this particular day, she was wearing a pink and white blouse, tan slacks, and low-cut tan shoes. Regular, comfortable, old lady walking shoes, not hiking boots. Here's the important part. Polly knew this trail intimately. She and her husband had a camper parked at the Deep Creek campground, and she had walked this specific path dozens of times. She wasn't a stranger to the woods. She could probably walk the Deep Creek Trail with her eyes closed. So on that beautiful Friday afternoon, Polly set out on a casual walk with two close friends, just 3 women, chatting, enjoying the autumn colors, taking their time. Now, this is where it gets strange. The hike itself is entirely normal. The 3 women are walking together, laughing, catching up. Polly, by all accounts, is in a great mood. Nothing seems off. But as they get closer to the end of the trail, something a little unusual happens. Polly picks up her pace. Now, she's not running. She's not panicking. According to her friends, she just kind of playfully speeds up. She pulls slightly ahead of them, maybe 10 or 15 feet. She walks around a gentle curve in the trail, crests a small rolling rise. And for about 10 to 15 seconds, she is out of their direct line of sight. That's it. That's the window. 10 to 15 seconds. Her 2 friends are literally right behind her. They keep their own pace, chatting. They round the same bend. They crest the same little hill. They look ahead, fully expecting to see Polly's pink blouse and red hair just a few yards down the path. The trail is empty. Not a person in sight. No movement in the woods. No sound. Just the path stretching ahead, completely vacant. At first, they don't panic. Of course they don't. Why would they? They assume Polly just got a little ahead of them and kept walking. Maybe she's just around the next bend. Maybe she went to the bathroom in the woods. Maybe. So they finish the hike. They walk all the way back to the parking area, fully expecting to find Polly leaning against the car, laughing at them for being slow. She's not there. The car is empty. The camper is locked. No Polly. Now the panic starts. The Park Service gets called in, and they launch what becomes one of the largest search operations the Smokies had ever seen up to that point. We're talking hundreds of volunteers, park rangers, Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents, search and rescue teams, helicopters scanning the tree canopy from above, bloodhounds brought in specifically to track her scent off the trail. They scoured that forest for days and days and days. They found absolutely nothing, not a footprint, not a torn piece of that pink and white blouse, not her glasses, not one of those low-cut tan shoes, not a hair, nothing. A few days into the search, park officials make a statement that, frankly, is wild. They tell reporters they believe Polly Melton is no longer in the park. Think about what that means. That's the Park Service, the people who know this terrain better than anyone, essentially saying, she's not here. She was never here. Stop looking, on a trail that she walked for the last time with two friends literally watching her back. Okay, let's take a breath and pull this apart, because every theory anyone has ever thrown at this case falls apart the moment you actually think about it. Let's start with the most obvious one. She wandered off the trail. Maybe she needed to pee. Maybe she saw a pretty wildflower. Maybe she felt dizzy. She had high blood pressure, right? And she stumbled into the brush. That's the rational, boring, adult explanation. But here's the thing. Her friends were behind her. Not way behind her. Just a few seconds behind her. If Polly had stepped off the trail into the woods, they would have seen her footprints leading off into the leaves. They would have seen flattened brush. They would have seen her pink blouse through the trees. The Deep Creek Trail is not lined by some sparse open meadow. It's lined by thick, dense Appalachian forest, thorny brush, dry autumn leaves that crunch under every single footstep. If a 180-pound woman walked off that trail, she would have sounded like a tank rolling through a bag of potato chips. Her friends would have heard the leaves crunching, the twigs snapping, the brush rustling. They heard nothing. Dead silence. The only sounds on that trail were their own footsteps. Okay. So maybe she didn't wander off. Maybe she ran. Maybe she wanted to ditch her friends. Maybe she panicked about something. Maybe she had a mental health crisis we don't know about. But let's look at the facts. Polly was 58 years old. She was overweight. She had high blood pressure bad enough that she needed daily medication for it. She was wearing low-cut tan shoes, not running shoes, not hiking boots, just regular walking shoes. You're telling me this woman suddenly turned into a sprinter? That in 10 to 15 seconds, she accelerated from a casual chat pace to a speed fast enough to disappear entirely down a long, straight stretch of trail? That she made it around the next bend, or into the trees, or over the next hill without her friends catching a single glimpse of her, without them hearing her ragged high blood pressure breathing? No. That's not physically possible for a woman of her age and condition. A healthy 25-year-old athlete in running shoes would have trouble pulling that off. Now, let's talk about the dogs, because this is where it goes from strange to downright unsettling. When search and rescue brought in the bloodhounds, those dogs are trained for exactly this scenario. A missing adult, a known trail, a fresh scent. This should be their bread and butter. A woman leaves a constant trail of skin cells, thousands every minute, on every surface she touches. Her scent should have been everywhere. The dogs couldn't track her. They couldn't follow her off the trail into the woods. The scent just ended. Wherever Polly went, the dogs couldn't go. The scent simply didn't lead anywhere. That's not how scent dogs work. That's not how bodies work. A 180-pound human being does not evaporate into the air. But according to the dogs, Polly did. Now, some people over the years have floated this theory that Polly actually orchestrated her own disappearance, that she pretended to speed up so she could duck off the trail, meet someone in a car at a prearranged pickup point, and just walk into a new life. And there's a little bit of circumstantial evidence for this. In the days before the hike, Polly had reportedly been acting a little strangely. Some unusual phone calls, a couple of missed commitments, and then months later, a check showed up cashed in her name in Birmingham, Alabama. Tennessee Bureau of Investigation agents chased that lead hard. It went nowhere. But here's the thing that kills the walkaway theory for me. Polly left her medication behind. All of it. Her blood pressure pills, her personal belongings. Her camper was still parked at Deep Creek. Her husband's entire life was just sitting there, waiting for her to come back. People who fake their own disappearance to start a new life planet. They take money, they take ID, and critically, they take the medication that keeps them alive. A woman with serious high blood pressure does not walk away from her daily meds on a whim. That's a slow-motion suicide. You'd be dead within weeks. And the cash check? A single check in a state hundreds of miles away with no corresponding trail of bank activity, no further sightings, no contact with family. That's not a new life. That's a red herring, or a thief, or a glitch. But it's not Polly starting fresh somewhere. So what are we left with? A perfectly healthy, well, reasonably healthy, 58-year-old woman on a trail she knew by heart with two friends who loved her walking 15 feet behind her, vanishes in a 10 to 15 second window on a flat, wide, heavily trafficked path in broad daylight. No sound, no scent trail, no footprints leaving the path, no dropped glasses, no torn clothes, no blood, no body, nothing. The Park Service eventually scaled the search back. Then they scaled it back again. And eventually, it just stopped. Polly Melton's case sits in the National Park Service's cold case files to this day, 40-plus years later. Every so often, there's a flurry of renewed interest, a podcast, a news article, a new tip. But the trail itself, both literally and figuratively, has gone cold. The Deep Creek Trail is still there. It's still a popular walk. Families still take their kids down it. Couples still walk it hand in hand on pretty autumn afternoons. If you stood on it today, you would have no idea that somewhere along those gentle curves, a 58-year-old grandmother in a pink and white blouse took about 10 steps ahead of her friends and stepped out of the world. And that's the part I can't shake. Because this wasn't a remote mountain peak. This wasn't a raging river. This wasn't a blizzard on a cliff face. This was a Friday afternoon walk with friends. 10 seconds, that's all it takes. 10 seconds on a sunny, easy trail with the people who love you walking right behind you. And then you're gone. Forever. Imagine this. You're hiking with your best friend in the Grand Canyon. You're on day one of a 9-day trek you've been planning for months. The sun is absolutely pounding down on you. It's about 110 degrees. The ground is jagged black volcanic rock. The air shimmers with heat. You come to a small hill. Your friend wants to go over the top. You decide to walk around it. It'll take maybe 2 or 3 minutes. You'll meet on the other side. Your friend crests the hill, walks down the other side, reaches the meeting point. You're not there. And you're never going to be there. Not that day, not the next day, not 6 days later when 50 search and rescue personnel with helicopters and tracking dogs have scoured 10 square miles of desert trying to find you. Not ever. That is exactly what happened to Floyd Roberts III in June 2016. An experienced hiker, a former NASA employee, a man his friends described as a survivor. He walked around one side of a small hill, and the Grand Canyon took him. Let me tell you how. Let's set the scene, because the location is half the story here. It's June 17th, 2016. We're not at the part of the Grand Canyon you see on postcards. We're not at the South Rim with the gift shops and the mule rides and the rangers. We are in the middle of nowhere. The far western edge of the canyon, an area called the Shivwitz Plateau, inside the Grand Canyon Parashant National Monument. This is one of the most isolated pieces of land in the entire lower 48 states. To even get to the starting point of the hike, you have to drive for hours on dirt roads so rough they regularly shred tires and destroy vehicle suspensions. There is zero cell service, zero infrastructure, zero water. If something goes wrong out here, you are on your own. The terrain is brutal. The plateau sits at around 6,000 feet of elevation, and it's covered in this patchwork of jagged basalt volcanic rock on top of Kaibab limestone. Sharp, ankle-breaking stuff. The vegetation is dense scrub oak, manzanita, and these massive Mojave yucca cacti with spines that will slice you open. You can be walking across what looks like flat, rolling ground, and suddenly, the earth just falls away into a 1,000-foot drop. No warning, no guardrail, just open space. And the weather. My God, the weather. June 2016 was a historic heat wave in Arizona. The National Weather Service had issued an excessive heat warning. On the rim, temperatures were in the upper 90s, but inside the canyon, where the dark rock absorbs and radiates the sun all day, we're talking 115 to 120 degrees. The humidity was somewhere around 6 to 13%. When you sweat, the moisture evaporates instantly off your skin. You don't even feel yourself getting dehydrated. You just slowly cook from the inside out. This is where Floyd Roberts was hiking. Now, Floyd was not some weekend warrior. He was 52 years old. He had worked for NASA in Alabama before moving to Florida to teach computer science at Middleton High School in Tampa. A man with a scientific brain, an analytical thinker. And more importantly, he was an experienced backpacker. His friends swore by his wilderness skills. One of his closest friends told investigators, and I'm paraphrasing here, that if anyone could survive getting lost out there, it was Floyd. He wasn't the guy you'd bet against. He was with his friend Ned Bryant and Ned's daughter, Madeline. They had a 9-day expedition planned, a route that would take them from the Kelly Tank area through Trail Canyon, down into the depths of the Grand Canyon, and eventually out through Separation Canyon. An ambitious trip, a serious trip. But here's the thing, and this is the first real wrinkle in the story. Floyd was carrying a massive professional-grade, low alpine backpack, bright blue. He was wearing a bright red long-sleeved shirt for sun protection. So far, so good. But on his feet, he was wearing multicolored mesh Nike free running shoes, gym shoes, designed for a treadmill, and he was wearing blue denim jeans in 115-degree heat. An experienced hiker going into the most brutal terrain in North America in running shoes and jeans. File that away. We'll come back to it. So it's the afternoon of June 17th. The three of them have driven the punishing dirt roads. They've parked. They've shouldered their packs. They're hiking across the Shivwitz Plateau near Kelly Tank, pushing through dense brush, feeling the heat just crushing down on them. Around 4:45 in the afternoon, they come up against a small topographical obstacle. A little hill, not a mountain, not a cliff, just a modest rise in the land. Ned and Madeline decide they'll go over the top. Floyd, maybe because of those minimalist gym shoes, maybe because he just felt like it, decides he'll walk around the base of it. They'll meet on the other side. It's a detour of minutes, maybe less. Ned and Madeline crest the hill. They walk down the far side. They reach the meeting point. Floyd isn't there. They wait. They figure, okay, he's taking his time, he's navigating the brush. A few more minutes pass, still nothing. They start calling his name. The desert is silent except for their voices. No response. And I want you to really sit with that for a second. Because whatever happened to Floyd happened in that tiny window, the time it takes to walk around the base of a small hill. 5 minutes, maybe 10, tops, in broad daylight, within shouting distance of two people who were actively expecting to see him walk into view. Ned starts to panic. They search the immediate area. Nothing. No footprints they can follow. No blue backpack visible through the brush. No red shirt. No sound. Now, remember, there's no cell service out here. Ned can't just whip out his phone and call 911. He has to spend the night in the canyon. The next morning, June 18th, he makes his way out far enough to contact authorities. He sends a haunting text message to his wife, Heidi. He tells her, "I'm very worried. Everything was going perfectly until the split." The Park Service launches a massive operation. We're talking elite search and rescue teams from Grand Canyon National Park, Parashant, Coconino County, and Mojave County. They bring in fixed-wing aircraft. They bring in specialized heli-attack helicopter crews. They deploy professional ground trackers. They grid off a 10-square-mile search area, and they sweep it methodically for 6 straight days in life-threatening heat. They find nothing. No backpack, no shirt, no shoes, no bones, no broken brush, no drag marks, no blood, nothing. On June 24th, the operation is officially scaled back to what they call continuous but limited mode, which is a polite bureaucratic way of saying, we give up. Rangers will keep an eye out during their normal patrols. Floyd Roberts, experienced hiker, former NASA guy, 3-minute detour, completely gone. Okay, let's do what we always do. Let's take the official theories and actually hold them up to the light. The main working theory from the Park Service is that Floyd got disoriented in the heat, wandered into the wrong canyon, specifically 209 Mile Canyon instead of the planned route, and died of heat stroke somewhere in a rock overhang where the helicopters couldn't see him. On the surface, that sounds reasonable. The heat was lethal. People absolutely do die of heat stroke out there. But here's the thing. Let's look at the timing. Floyd was separated from his friends for minutes, not hours, minutes. In those minutes, he didn't just get lost and wander miles away. He didn't have time to. Even if he got completely disoriented the second he stepped around that hill and started running in the wrong direction as fast as he could in his little gym shoes, he wouldn't have made it far. Heat stroke doesn't teleport you. Dehydration doesn't teleport you. His body should have been right there, somewhere within a few hundred yards of that hill. And Ned and Madeline searched that area. The SAR team searched that area intensively for 6 days. A 10-square-mile grid, which is an enormous area for a man on foot in denim jeans and running shoes in 115-degree heat. Nothing. Okay, let's try the next theory. Maybe he fell. Maybe he stepped on a loose rock in those terrible shoes, slipped, and tumbled into a hidden fissure or a rock crevice. The plateau is famous for hiding drops in the terrain. Scrub oak conceals the edge of the world out there. This is actually the most plausible explanation anyone has come up with. But here's where the logic breaks down. Floyd was carrying a giant bright blue low alpine backpack. He was wearing a bright red shirt. These are fluorescent, violent colors in a landscape of browns, greens, and grays. Pilots looking for missing hikers specifically trained to spot those unnatural colors from hundreds of feet in the air. And we had helicopters sweeping that search grid for 6 days straight, specialized helitack crews who spot wildfires from the sky. A red shirt or a blue backpack against desert rock should have lit up their field of vision like a flare. Nothing. And if he fell into a crevice, even one with a rock overhang, shouldn't there have been some sign of it? A disturbance at the edge, a dropped item, a smear of dust, a scuff mark on the stone? Ground trackers did find some vague, disturbed earth at one point early in the search, but the Park Service officially stated they couldn't confirm it belonged to Floyd. Let's talk about the silence. And this is what really gets me. If Floyd had fallen, he would have made noise. A 170-pound man plus a 40-pound pack tumbling off a ledge creates an enormous amount of sound. Rocks would be kicked loose, brush would snap, and critically, he would have screamed. Everyone screams when they fall. It's a reflex. Ned and Madeline were maybe a few dozen yards away, over the top of a small hill. The desert was quiet. There was no wind. They heard absolutely nothing. No yell, no crash, no skittering rocks, no, "Hey guys, something's wrong." Just silence and the tracking dogs. When they finally brought in scent dogs to the last seen point at the base of that hill, the dogs had nothing to work with. No continuous scent trail leading off in any direction. A man leaves skin cells constantly. He leaves sweat, especially in 115-degree heat. Dogs should have been able to follow him somewhere. They couldn't. Now, I want to be fair. There's a simpler, more realistic possibility we have to acknowledge. Those terrible shoes could have ended him fast. One wrong step on loose basalt in a mesh running shoe, a fall into a narrow limestone fissure hidden by scrub oak, a head strike that killed him instantly before he could cry out, and a body wedged so deep and so awkwardly that helicopters just can't see it. It happens. The Grand Canyon hides bodies. But even that doesn't explain the distance. Floyd was walking around the base of the hill, the side that his friends weren't on. He should have been in a predictable narrow corridor, not 10 square miles of desert. The Park Service officially scaled back the search on June 24, 2016. Floyd's name sits on the National Park Service's cold case list, alongside a handful of other haunting Grand Canyon disappearances. His family never got a body, never got closure, never got an explanation. Nearly a decade later, nothing has ever turned up. Not a boot, not a zipper pull from that blue pack, not a bone. The desert has kept whatever it took that afternoon, and it seems pretty clear at this point that it's not giving it back. And that's the part that lingers with me. Because Floyd Roberts wasn't some tourist in flip-flops wandering off a marked path. He was a systems-minded guy, a former NASA employee, an experienced backpacker whose friends genuinely believed he was the last person in the world who would disappear out there. He was walking around the base of a small hill. His friends were walking over the top. The detour was supposed to take 3 minutes. 3 minutes. That's all it took. 3 minutes of not being watched on a piece of ground the size of a suburban backyard in broad daylight with 2 people waiting for him on the other side. And the Grand Canyon opened up, swallowed him whole, and closed again without a sound. You know that idea that there's safety in numbers? That if you stick with a group, especially in a public place, nothing bad can really happen to you? Somebody would see, somebody would hear, somebody would step in. Yeah, about that. On June 17, 2011, a 30-year-old man named George Panca hiked to the top of Upper Yosemite Falls with 20 of his friends. 20. Plus probably a couple hundred other tourists on the trail that day. It was one of the most popular hikes in one of the most visited national parks in America in the middle of a bright summer afternoon. And somewhere between the top of the waterfall and the valley floor, George disappeared. No witnesses, no sound, no body, no gear. 14 years later, we have no idea where he went. And what makes this case really stick with me is that George wasn't alone in some obscure backcountry corner of nowhere. He was surrounded by people, he was surrounded by trail, and he still managed to step clean out of existence. Okay, let's talk about where this happened, because the location is absolutely central to why this case is so baffling. Yosemite National Park, June 2011, early summer. The park is packed, school's just letting out, families are starting their vacations, and Yosemite in June is basically a highlight reel of American wilderness. Granite cliffs, pine forests, waterfalls thundering from the snowmelt. And the Upper Yosemite Falls Trail is one of the most popular hikes in the entire park. It is not remote, it is not obscure, it is not the kind of place where only elite mountaineers dare to go. It's a well-worn, heavily trafficked tourist trail that thousands of people walk every single week during the summer. You can look it up on Google Images right now and see a constant stream of people in flip-flops, kids with water bottles, retirees with walking sticks, everybody. It's a strenuous hike, sure. We're talking about climbing up alongside North America's tallest waterfall, rising over 2,000 feet from the valley floor. The trail is steep. It zigzags up the granite face in a series of switchbacks. At the top, you get an absolutely jaw-dropping panoramic view of the valley, and Yosemite Creek flows along the flat ground at the summit before it plunges over the edge and becomes the waterfall. But the key word here is crowded. On a sunny Friday in June, this trail is essentially a conga line of tourists moving up and down the rock face. You're rarely more than a few yards away from other human beings. Now, George Panca. Let me paint you a picture. He was 30 years old, from Hawthorne, California, just south of L.A. Stocky build, 5'10", somewhere between 230 and 240 pounds, dark brown hair, blue eyes, not a small guy, not someone who blends into the scenery. And he was wearing some very noticeable clothes that day. Gray sweatpants with white stripes running down the legs, a black shirt, gray and blue running shoes. He was also carrying a blue cloth bag, bright blue. In a landscape of gray granite and green pine, a blue cloth bag is not something that disappears easily. George wasn't a survivalist. He wasn't an experienced mountaineer. He was a regular guy on a day trip. But here's the thing, he wasn't hiking alone. He was part of a large group of about 20 people from his local church. 20 friends, 20 witnesses. The day starts out completely normal. The church group sets out from the valley floor in the morning and begins the long trudge up the zigzagging trail. Step by step, switchback by switchback, they grind their way to the top of Upper Yosemite Falls. It's a serious hike, the kind that takes most people 6 to 8 hours round trip, but everyone makes it. At the summit, the group spreads out the way any big group naturally does. Some people are admiring the view, some are taking photos, some are refilling water bottles from Yosemite Creek. George wanders off from the main cluster for a bit. He goes down to the water to refill his bottle, by most accounts. Nothing unusual, nothing alarming. Now, side note that I have to mention, George didn't bring much food or water with him. He was kind of underprepared for the full length of the hike, which is odd but not unheard of for a day tripper who figured the group would share supplies. At some point in the afternoon, around 2:40 p.m., the group starts gathering up to head back down. They do a loose count. They look around. They assume everyone's accounted for or already starting the descent ahead of them, and they begin the long hike back down to the valley floor. The hike down takes hours. The group is spread out across the trail, chatting, resting, taking in the views on the way down. Different paces, different breaks. This is totally normal. They get to the bottom. They gather in the parking area at the valley floor. They do another head count. George isn't there. At first, nobody really panics. It's a big group. Maybe he's still coming down. Maybe he stopped to rest. Maybe he took a slightly different side path. Hours pass. The sun starts getting low, and George still hasn't shown up. At 9 p.m. that night, the church group finally accepts that something is very wrong, and they officially report him missing to park authorities. The response is massive. The following morning, Yosemite launches one of the biggest search operations they've conducted in years. We're talking over 105 search and rescue personnel from a whole list of California counties: Inyo, Mono, Mariposa, Marin, even Los Angeles. They bring in tracking dogs. They deploy helicopters to do aerial sweeps over the entire area around Upper Yosemite Falls. They send teams to scale the cliff faces below the waterfall in case he fell. They check every plunge pool, every rock ledge, every pile of boulders at the base of the falls. For a full week, these teams absolutely saturate the area with eyes and noses and technology. A highly trained, coordinated professional search in one of the most well-mapped and accessible parts of the park. And after a full week of intense searching, the Park Service makes an official statement. And it's a brutal one. They say they're scaling back the operation due to, quote, a complete lack of clues. Not a few clues, not some evidence, a complete lack of clues. No body, no blood, no footprints leading off the trail, no discarded clothing, no blue cloth bag, not even a single gray sweatpant thread caught on a bush. Nothing. Okay, let's do the thing. Let's pick apart the theories. The official theory is the most boring, most tragic, most rational one. The Park Service figures George probably wandered too close to the edge of Yosemite Creek near the top of the falls, or leaned over to look at the view, slipped on the slick granite, which is genuinely slippery. The rocks up there are polished smooth by decades of water flow, and fell into the creek. The current swept him over the edge of the waterfall, and his body either got pinned in a deep plunge pool at the base or wedged in between massive boulders where helicopters couldn't spot him. On paper, that sounds plausible. Slick rocks near a waterfall. It happens. People genuinely have died at Yosemite Falls this way. But here's the thing. Let's break that theory down with some actual logic. First, the crowd factor. I keep coming back to this because it's the most impossible part of this entire case. George was hiking with 20 friends, 20, and that trail on a sunny Friday in June had easily hundreds of other tourists on it. This is not a remote location. This is not an obscure waterfall. The Upper Yosemite Falls Trail is one of the most Instagrammed hikes in the country. If George slipped near the creek and fell into the water at the top of the falls, how does not a single person see it happen? Not a friend from his group, not a random tourist with a camera, not a kid on his parents' shoulders pointing at the view. 20 people plus hundreds of strangers, and nobody sees a 240-pound man fall into the water right at the very top of North America's tallest waterfall? Second, the sound. A 240-pound man falling into a creek and then getting swept off a cliff makes noise. A lot of noise. He would yell, he would scream, he would thrash against the rocks, water would splash, rocks would shift. In the quiet of a mountaintop trail, even a crowded one, that kind of chaos is not something people just miss. Nothing. No reports of screaming, no reports of splashing, No reports of anyone yelling, "He fell, he fell." Total silence from every single person on that trail that day. Third, the trail itself. The Upper Yosemite Falls Trail is not a vague, wandering deer path through the forest. It is a distinct, obvious, carved-out walkway through granite and dirt. If you step off of it, you know immediately. You're either on the trail or you're climbing over rocks. There's no ambiguity. So this theory that George just drifted off into the void, it doesn't match the reality of the terrain. There's no place to drift to. Fourth, the blue bag. Let's talk about this because I find it genuinely strange. George was carrying a bright blue cloth bag. In a landscape of pale granite and green pine trees, an unnatural bright blue color is exactly what search helicopters are trained to look for. That's the whole point of carrying visible gear in the wilderness. Even if his body ended up hidden somewhere, pinned under a rock or deep in a plunge pool, you would expect the bag to come loose at some point, float downstream, get caught on a snag, something. It never did. The bag is gone too, just as gone as George. Fifth, the search dogs. When the dogs were brought in the next morning, this should have been their ideal scenario. Fresh scent, known starting point at the top of the falls, well-defined trail. Dogs are phenomenally good at picking up a scent trail, leaving a path. They are specifically built for exactly this moment. And yet, no trail. Nothing to follow off the main path. Nothing leading toward the creek. Nothing leading into the trees. Nothing leading anywhere. And then you've got what I consider the worst logic gap of all. If George did fall off the waterfall, his body should have ended up somewhere in the plunge pool or the boulder field at the base. Search teams scoured that entire area. They went over every inch of it, for a week. And they found nothing. Not a shoe, not a fragment of black shirt, not one gray sweatpants scrap. Nothing. Which means one of two things. Either his body is impossibly well hidden in a place that 100 SAR professionals somehow missed for 7 straight days in a heavily accessible part of the park, or he never went over the falls at all. And if he didn't go over the falls, then where did he go? He didn't hike out. There was no trail for the dogs to follow. He didn't wander off through the forest past 20 friends and hundreds of tourists without a single person seeing him. He didn't fall anywhere in the search radius. He just stopped being in Yosemite. The official case on George Panca has been cold for over a decade now. His face shows up on missing persons databases. His family has never given up hoping. Investigators have never closed the file. But the trail, like George himself, went quiet a long time ago. And here's what I can't stop thinking about. Yosemite is not the place this is supposed to happen. This is not some remote Alaskan glacier. This is not the deep Appalachian wilderness. This is one of America's most beloved and most visited parks. It has rangers, it has cell service in parts, it has a ranger station minutes away. It has tens of thousands of witnesses every single day during the summer. And still, somehow, a 30-year-old man with a bright blue bag hiking with 20 of his friends stepped off a crowded tourist trail in broad daylight, and the mountain just took him. There's supposed to be safety in numbers. That's what we tell ourselves. That's why we travel in groups. That's why we bring friends along. Because somebody will see, somebody will hear, somebody will step in. But George Panca was in a crowd of 20 friends and a sea of strangers on a sunny afternoon at one of the most popular hikes in America. And he vanished anyway. You can be surrounded. You can be in plain sight. You can be in the middle of a holiday crowd on a marked, paved, rangered, camera-filled tourist trail. And in the blink of an eye, you can be entirely, completely, forever alone. Here's something that's going to make your skin crawl. Think about the guy in the uniform, the park ranger. The person whose entire job is to know the trails, to manage the hazards, to find other people when they get lost. He carries a badge, he has a radio. He knows every rock, every wash, every shortcut in his park. Now imagine that guy, that expert, that authority, walks out of his visitor center on a calm Sunday afternoon for a routine patrol and never comes back. Not that day, not that week, not in the 40-plus years since. On January 13th, 1980, a 41-year-old park ranger named Paul Fugate stepped out of the Chiricahua National Monument Visitor Center in southeastern Arizona. He told his coworker he was going for a short hike and he'd be back in a couple of hours to close up shop. He walked into the desert in his full green and gray uniform with a gold badge on his chest, and he vanished. Paul Fugate is, to this day, the only on-duty National Park Ranger in U.S. history to disappear in the line of duty without a trace, and what happened to him is almost certainly not a hiking accident. Let me walk you through it. First, let's talk about where this happened, because the Chiricahua National Monument is one of the strangest pieces of geography in America, and it matters. It's in the far southeastern corner of Arizona, about 120 miles from Tucson. We are genuinely in the middle of nowhere. Dry, high desert country. The monument itself is only about 17 square miles, but every single inch of it looks like another planet. They literally call it the Wonderland of Rocks. Here's why. Around 27 million years ago, a massive volcanic eruption dumped thick layers of ash and pumice across this region. Over millions of years, wind and water carved that soft volcanic rock into this alien forest of towering stone pinnacles, narrow spires, and balancing boulders that look like they should have fallen over 1,000 years ago. It's a landscape of deep twisting canyons, dry washes, and mazes of rock that can disorient you in seconds. Dense scrub oak and juniper fill the gaps, shadows hide dead ends. Oh, and in January of 1980, there was another wrinkle. Southeastern Arizona, right up against the Mexican border, was becoming an increasingly active corridor for drug smugglers. Cartels moving product up through remote desert routes. Isolated, lightly patrolled parkland was a gift to these operations. Keep that in the back of your mind. Now, Paul Fugate, 41 years old, full-time NPS naturalist and a commissioned law enforcement ranger. That law enforcement part is important. It means he had a badge and authority to confront people breaking the law in the park. He was in prime physical shape. He was an experienced outdoorsman. He was known to be a little unconventional, maybe a little rebellious, didn't love the bureaucracy, but he was genuinely competent. The guy knew those rocks like the back of his hand. This was his park. Not just a trail he'd hiked a few times, his job. On that Sunday, he was in full uniform, the distinctive green and gray of the National Park Service, with his gold badge over his heart, the NPS arrowhead patch on his shoulder, a green jacket, and rugged red-wing boots. He had glasses and a beard. He was, in every sense, extremely visible. You could not mistake Paul Fugate for a random tourist. It's the afternoon of January 13th, 1980. A quiet Sunday at the visitor center. Paul's working his shift. There's a seasonal park aide there with him. Everything is routine. Around 2 p.m., Paul tells the aide he's going to step out for a bit. He says he's going to hike one of the shorter trails that leads out toward the faraway ranch area, which is a historic property the park had relatively recently acquired. He says he'll be back by about 4:30 p.m. to close up the visitor center. That's it. That's the last conversation anyone has with him. And I want you to picture this because it's almost mundane. He grabs his things, walks out the door of the visitor center into the bright desert afternoon, and starts down the trail. A uniformed ranger on a routine walk. Nothing unusual, nothing suspicious. It's the kind of hike he's probably done hundreds of times. 4:30 p.m. comes around. The visitor center is supposed to close. Paul's not back. At first, the aide probably isn't that worried. Paul's a ranger. Maybe he got caught up chatting with a tourist on the trail. Maybe he got distracted by something interesting. A plant, a rock formation, who knows? He's a naturalist, that's what he does. But as the desert sun starts to drop and it gets cold, and Paul still hasn't come back, concern turns into alarm. Nightfall. And still nothing. This man didn't just lose track of time. The search response is massive, and it has to be, because a missing ranger is just about the highest priority missing person scenario the Park Service can have. We're talking extensive foot teams, tracking dogs, helicopters, and light aircraft combing every inch of the monument's 12,000 acres. They sweep the canyons, they check the washes, they search the complex rock formations. They do it for weeks. And what do they find? Nothing. Not a piece of that green jacket, not a single red-wing boot, Not the gold badge catching the sun from some rocky ledge, not a pair of glasses, not even a scrap of radio equipment. In a 17-square-mile park with a guy wearing one of the most recognizable uniforms in America, nothing. Okay, this is where we have to start pulling the theories apart, and honestly, with this case, the theories fall apart pretty fast. Theory number 1. Paul had a hiking accident. He tripped, fell into a canyon, broke a leg, couldn't get out. This is the theory Park Service brass probably wanted to believe at first, because it's the simplest, and because it means nobody has to open a criminal investigation. But look, it falls apart almost immediately when you think about who we're talking about. Paul Fugate was a commissioned law enforcement ranger. His literal job was teaching other people how to survive in this park. He knew where the safe areas were. He knew where helicopters could spot someone from the air. He knew the distress protocols. If Paul Fugate broke his ankle, he would have hobbled to a clearing, waved his uniform around, done something to get himself seen. This is a man in a bright, high-contrast ranger uniform with a reflective gold badge. In an era of aggressive helicopter searches, that outfit was basically a built-in signal flare. And even if, worst case, he died on the spot from a fall, no cry for help, no radio call, nothing. His body should still be somewhere. Skeletal remains, uniform fragments, his belt buckle. A 12,000-acre park is a lot of ground, but it's not infinite. Trackers, dogs, helicopters, and years of subsequent searches have turned up zero physical evidence. Not a thread, not a buckle, nothing. Okay, theory 2. Paul walked away, started a new life. This was actually floated pretty seriously early on. The argument went that Paul was kind of a rebellious personality. He had some friction with NPS management. He reportedly had a complicated personal life. Maybe he just got fed up, walked into the desert, hitched a ride, and started over somewhere. But let's look at his desk. He left his winter coat behind. It's January. In the Arizona high desert, nights drop to freezing. You do not start a new life by abandoning the coat you need for your first week of it. He left his favorite pair of glasses on his desk. He wore glasses. He needed them. You don't start a new life half-blind. And critically, he left an uncashed paycheck. Think about that. A man who is orchestrating a secret runaway doesn't leave his own money sitting on the desk. He cashes it. He takes it with him. He needs every dollar he can get. On top of all that, in 40-plus years, Paul Fugate has never accessed a bank account under his name, never contacted his wife, Dodie, never called his parents, never popped up on any kind of record anywhere. People who walk away eventually slip. Somebody spots them, somebody gets a call, somebody cashes a check in Birmingham, something happens. Paul? Absolutely nothing. That silence is not the silence of a man in hiding. That's the silence of a man who is not alive to make a sound. Which brings us to the scent trail. This is the part that really made investigators shift gears. The bloodhounds picked up Paul's scent leaving the visitor center. They followed it down the trail he said he was going to hike. Everything totally normal. Then the scent trail stopped. Not faded. Not got confused by wildlife. It stopped. Right at a paved road that runs through the park. Let that sink in. The trail didn't wander off into the rocks where a lost hiker would go. It didn't lead to a ravine where an injured ranger might have fallen. It went from dirt and brush straight to asphalt, and on the asphalt, it ended. There's really only one way a scent trail ends like that. The person got into a vehicle. And then, the real gut punch. A witness comes forward. This witness, a guy named Robert Horton, tells investigators he saw something strange that same afternoon. A pickup truck driving out of the park area, and in the cab of that truck, squeezed between two unidentified men, was Paul Fugate. Wearing his uniform, slumped over, unconscious or at least deeply distressed, and notably, not wearing his glasses. Authorities actually brought Horton in for hypnosis to help him remember more details. Whatever the merits of hypnotic recall as evidence, the basic sighting matched up with what the dogs were telling them. The ranger got into or was put into a vehicle, so now the picture starts coming into focus. Here's what investigators strongly suspect happened. Paul Fugate is out on a routine patrol. Remember, this is southeastern Arizona in 1980. Drug smuggling, illegal poaching, maybe even trafficking operations are actively using the remote borderlands. The Chiricahua's isolated canyons and backcountry washes would be perfect cover for something illegal happening. Paul, being Paul, stumbles onto something. Maybe a drug drop, maybe a cache, maybe people he shouldn't have seen. He's in uniform, armed with a badge and authority, and he confronts them. And the people he confronted decided there couldn't be a witness. They subdue him, probably knocking him unconscious, which would explain why a trained law enforcement officer doesn't fight back, doesn't radio for help, doesn't scream. They haul him to the pickup truck. They drive him out of the park. And they get rid of him somewhere out in the vast, empty Arizona-Mexico borderlands where a body is never going to be found. By 1983, the NPS told the press that arrests in the Fugate case were imminent. They believed they knew who did it, or at least had strong suspects. More than one person was supposedly on the verge of being charged. No charges were ever filed. The case went cold. The reward for information eventually climbed to $60,000, a massive sum that tells you exactly how seriously the Park Service took this case. Paul Fugate has since been declared legally dead. His body has never been found. Paul Fugate's case is the longest-running missing person case in the state of Arizona, and he holds another, grimmer distinction. In the entire history of the United States National Park Service, he is the only ranger to have vanished without a trace while actively on duty, in uniform, during a routine shift. Think about what that means. The person whose entire professional identity was protecting the park, protecting the public, enforcing the law in the wilderness, that person became the unsolved mystery. The authority became the victim. And the most haunting part is how ordinary the day started. A quiet Sunday shift, a short hike on a familiar trail, back by 4:30 to lock up, the kind of thing he'd done 1,000 times. He walked out the door of that visitor center in his crisp green and gray uniform, the gold badge catching the afternoon sun, arrowhead patch on his sleeve, red wing boots crunching on the desert trail. And somewhere between the visitor center and Fairway Ranch, under those bizarre towering rock formations of the Wonderland of Rocks, Paul Fugate crossed paths with something or someone he wasn't supposed to. The uniform, the badge, the training, the decades of wilderness experience, none of it mattered. The desert kept him. And whoever took him from it is still out there, or long dead, taking the secret with them. Paul Fugate was supposed to be the guy you call when someone goes missing in the Chiricahua. Instead, he became the one who never came home. Imagine you're on the trip of a lifetime. You've paid thousands of dollars to raft the Colorado River through the heart of the Grand Canyon. It's day 6. The sun is brutal, the water is freezing, and everything is running perfectly. Because you've got a team of expert guides whose entire job is to keep you alive in this place. One of those guides is a 22-year-old named Morgan Heimer. Tall, fit, competent, wearing a bright neon orange life vest you can spot from half a mile away. He's the guy you'd run to if something went wrong. You're standing at a lunch stop. You chat with him for a second. You turn around to grab something from your bag. When you turn back, Morgan is gone. Not walked down the beach gone. Not taking a break gone. Gone. And over the next 6 days, dozens of searchers with helicopters and motorboats are going to comb 14 miles of the Colorado River looking for him. They will not find a single thing. Not his shirt, not his sandals, not his brightly colored water bottle, not that neon orange life vest that was designed to float. Nothing. And nearly 10 years later, Morgan Heimer is still gone. The canyon just took him. Let's set the scene, because the location is genuinely one of the most extreme environments you can be in on American soil. It's June 2nd, 2015. We are deep inside Grand Canyon National Park, not at the rim, not at the overlooks where tourists take selfies. We are at the bottom, the actual floor of the canyon, where the Colorado River carves its way through walls of rock that rise over a mile above your head. This part of the canyon is a world of extremes. Up on the rim, you might get a breeze. Down here, nothing. The canyon walls trap the heat. June temperatures on the river can easily hit 105, 110 degrees Fahrenheit, and the dark rock just absorbs the sun all day and radiates it back at you. It's like sitting inside an oven. But here's the crazy part. The river itself is freezing. The Colorado down here is fed from deep in Lake Powell, so the water comes out of Glen Canyon Dam at around 50 degrees. That is cold enough to cause hypothermia in minutes. So you've got this bizarre thermal sandwich, blistering heat on the banks, glacial cold in the water, and the river is moving fast. The current is relentless, and it hides all kinds of nasty features: hydraulics, undercut rocks, recirculating holes that can pin a swimmer underwater indefinitely. Our specific location on this day is a spot called Pumpkin Springs at River Mile 213. It's a popular stop for commercial river trips. There's a kind of travertine pool formation there, and the cliffs nearby have low ledges that companies sometimes let guests jump from into the deeper water. The banks are lined with thick tamarisk brush. The sandstone cliffs rise sheer on either side. It's dramatic, beautiful, and completely isolated. There is no road out, no cell service, no way to simply walk back to civilization. The only way you came in is by boat, and the only way you're leaving is by boat. Now, Morgan Heimer, 22 years old, from Cody, Wyoming, 6 feet tall, about 175 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes. But more importantly, Morgan was not a tourist. He was a professional. He was employed as a commercial river guide by an outfitter called Tour West. That's not some weekend gig. These are the people tasked with navigating multi-day expeditions through some of the most dangerous whitewater in North America. To be a guide on the Colorado and the Grand Canyon, you have to be in elite physical condition. You need swift water rescue certifications. You need expert-level swimming abilities. You need to know every rapid, every eddy, every hazardous feature on hundreds of miles of river. Morgan had all of that. And on this day, he was dressed like a guide should be. A dark-colored Astral personal flotation device, that's a professional-grade life vest, a blue plaid long-sleeve shirt, bright-colored shorts, Chaco sandals on his feet, a maroon baseball cap, and, small detail, remember this, he was carrying a distinctive bright purple water bottle. It's day 6 of an 8-day commercial trip. The group is rolling along. Morgan and the other guides have been managing the clients well. Nothing unusual, nothing foreboding. Around 3:30 in the afternoon, they pull their boats over at Pumpkin Springs. The plan is to let the clients do some recreational cliff jumping, a popular activity at this spot with controlled jumps from low ledges into the river. Morgan is in full-on guide mode. He's running the safety for the jump site. He's coordinating with clients, making sure they jump one at a time, watching them hit the water, making sure everyone surfaces, waving them toward shore. This is routine work for him. By about 3:55 p.m., the last client has done their jump. It went fine. Everyone's accounted for. At this point, Morgan and the lead guide, the senior guide on the trip, swap positions on the cliff face. Just a basic operational handoff. At 4 p.m., the lead guide has a brief conversation directly with Morgan. It's a totally mundane exchange. The lead guide basically offers Morgan the rest of the afternoon off. Hey, you've been working hard. Go take a break. Chill out. Morgan acknowledges this. The lead guide turns his head to address a nearby client. Maybe answering a question. Maybe giving an instruction. It's a matter of seconds. He turns back. Morgan is gone. Now, at first, nobody sounds any alarms. This is important. Because Morgan had just been told he could take a break, so the lead guide thinks, okay, he walked into the brush to chill out. Maybe he's taking a nap under the tamarisk. Maybe he hiked a little way up a side canyon for some quiet. It's fine. So they just keep doing their thing. The afternoon rolls on. The group has dinner at dusk. And Morgan doesn't show up for dinner. Now, the alarm bells start ringing. A guide doesn't just skip dinner, especially not without telling anyone. The crew starts a hasty search. They walk up and down the beach. They check the side canyons. They blow emergency whistles into the dusk. They call his name across the river. Nothing. The next morning, June 3rd, the crew uses a satellite phone to contact Grand Canyon Dispatch, and the Park Service launches one of the most aggressive river searches in recent memory. We're talking helicopters equipped with forward-looking infrared, FLIR, scanning for body heat, Motorized river patrol boats sweeping downstream, expert ground trackers combing the banks, scent dogs. They search 14 river miles, from mile 211 all the way down to mile 225. 6 days of this, non-stop, in 100-plus degree heat, and they find absolutely nothing. No body, no PFD, no shirt, no shoes, no purple water bottle, no footprints leading anywhere. On June 8th, the Park Service scales the operation back to a limited continuous mode. Morgan is just gone. Okay, let's do the thing. Let's actually think about this. The official theory, the most rational explanation, is that Morgan somehow slipped, fell into the Colorado River silently, and got pulled under by one of those invisible hydraulic features, a recirculating hole, an undercut rock, something that pinned him beneath the surface and held him until his body eventually washed downstream through a canyon where searchers just couldn't spot him. On paper, I get it. The Colorado River is legitimately one of the deadliest waterways in North America. People do drown in it. It happens. But this specific case has so many holes in that theory that it basically falls apart the second you press on it. Let's start with what I think is the biggest logic gap of all: the life vest. Morgan was wearing an Astral PFD. That's a high-end, professional-grade commercial life jacket, not a pool floaty, not one of those thin orange things they hand out at rental boat docks. This is the kind of vest that is specifically engineered to keep a person's face above water even if they're unconscious. It is sealed foam flotation panels that cannot sink. Even if Morgan hit his head on a rock and went in completely limp, that vest should have kept his body at the surface. And here's the thing about the color. PFDs are deliberately made in high visibility colors, oranges, reds, yellows, so that searchers can spot them from helicopters, from boats, from the banks. In a landscape of brown sandstone, tan beaches, and muddy green river water, a bright professional-grade life vest is basically a floating flag. It's designed to be the most noticeable thing in the entire environment. The Park Service searched 14 river miles. That's a lot of river, but it's also heavily gridded, searched by multiple aircraft and multiple boats. A bright vest would have turned up, either on the water or caught in an eddy or washed up on a sandbar. It didn't. Either Morgan went into the water without the vest, which makes no sense for a professional guide working a cliff jumping stop, or something actively held him in the vest under, indefinitely, which I gotta tell you is physically almost impossible. The foam in those vests doesn't compress under water pressure enough to cancel its buoyancy. Even at significant depth, that thing wants to float. Okay, let's try the next theory. Maybe he didn't fall in the water. Maybe he wandered off into a side canyon, fell, hit his head on the rocks, and died somewhere ground teams couldn't reach. But the ground trackers came up empty too. They scoured the banks and the side canyons, no footprints leading up into the terrain, no broken brush, no disturbed sand, no sign that anyone wandered off deep into any of the accessible washes. And Morgan had just been talking to the lead guide. That conversation happened at the jump site. In the few seconds it took the lead guide to turn his head, Morgan could not have covered any meaningful distance. He was right there. And then he wasn't. And then there's the professional factor. This is the one that really gets me. Let's look at who we're talking about. Morgan Heimer was a commercial river guide. That means he had probably been through swiftwater rescue training. He knew exactly how the Colorado River kills people. He had probably personally rescued clients from the river. He knew where not to stand. He knew how to recognize dangerous currents. He knew not to climb on loose, slippery rock near the water's edge without being secured. The idea that a trained, safety-focused, 22-year-old professional in peak physical condition just casually walked himself into an unrecoverable lethal situation during a routine lunch break. That's the thing that doesn't compute. That's like saying an airline pilot forgot how to land. And finally, there's the silence. Morgan was surrounded. Commercial rafting stops are not quiet, empty places. There were dozens of people at that site. Fellow guides, paying clients, other crew members. People were on the beach, on the cliff, in the water, on the boats. If Morgan fell, if he slipped, if he hit rocks on the way down, if he got sucked into a current, that event would have made noise. A shout, a splash, a scrape against stone. Not a single person reported hearing anything. A 22-year-old professional guide in a bright life vest, surrounded by dozens of witnesses at a well-known and heavily mapped stop on a heavily traveled stretch of the Colorado River in broad daylight on a calm afternoon. In a window of seconds, gone. Some fringe theories have tried to suggest Morgan staged his own disappearance, that he was a river professional who knew how to hike out of the canyon and wanted to start over somewhere. But that theory also collapses pretty fast. Hiking out of the Grand Canyon from River Mile 213 is a brutal multi-day endeavor requiring enormous amounts of water, food, and shade that Morgan didn't have. The scent dogs didn't find a hiking trail out, and Morgan had no known reason to walk away from his life. Morgan Heimer's case remains officially open. The Park Service lists him on their cold case page. His family has continued to advocate for answers for years. Reward offers have been made, theories have been kicked around, podcasts have covered it. Nothing new has ever turned up. And that's what I keep coming back to. The Colorado River is relentless. It carries everything downstream eventually. Logs, boats, gear, bodies. Over 6 days of professional searching in a place where every inch of the water and the banks had been surveyed. Nothing surfaced. Not a piece of his shirt, not a sandal, not the purple water bottle. The guide who was paid to know this river better than anyone, the expert in the safety vest, the professional who had trained for exactly these kinds of emergencies. The canyon took him anyway. And I think that's the part of this story that sticks. Because we tell ourselves that if you're prepared, if you're skilled, if you have the right gear, the wilderness can't truly hurt you. That's the whole premise of outdoor safety. Wear the vest, hire the guide, follow the rules. Morgan did all of that. He was the guide. He was wearing the vest. And the Colorado River, in the space of about 15 seconds, in broad daylight, with dozens of people watching the wrong direction, closed over Morgan Heimer like he'd never been there at all. Picture this. You're hiking alone, deep in the backcountry of Yosemite. It's a beautiful June afternoon. You find a quiet spot off the trail, set down your heavy pack, and sit down to eat lunch. You pull out a sandwich, you take a bite, maybe two. You set the sandwich down. And then you stand up, walk away from everything you own, your food, your shelter, your water, your map, your camera, and you disappear into the forest forever. That is, almost exactly what happened to a 51-year-old experienced backpacker named Michael Fugate in June of 2005. Searchers eventually found his backpack. They found his gear. They found his lunch, half-eaten, sitting exactly where he left it. They never found Mike. And the part that still messes with SAR veterans to this day is what Mike's actions at that rest stop tell us and what they don't. Because everything about that scene is contradictory. Everything. Let me walk you through it. First, the location. Because people hear Yosemite and they immediately think of the valley. They think of El Capitan. They think of Half Dome. They think of huge crowds, paved paths, tour buses, ranger stations every 50 yards. That is not where Mike was. Mike was hiking in the Hetch Hetchy backcountry, specifically in the area around Tiltil Valley and Lake Vernon, deep in the Daniel J. Evans wilderness. If you've ever been up there, you know it's a completely different world from the valley. Hetch Hetchy sits in a remote northwestern corner of Yosemite National Park, and once you cross into that wilderness, you are out there. No cell service, no nearby roads, no casual tourists, just high-elevation alpine lakes, steep granite drop-offs, towering pine forests, and miles of empty, rugged Sierra Nevada. And June 2005 was a weird time to be up there. The weather was unpredictable. Even though it was technically summer, a severe late-season snowstorm was rolling into the high country right around the time Mike was hiking. Temperatures could drop fast, visibility could vanish in minutes, trails that were perfectly clear in the morning could be buried in snow by the afternoon. This is the kind of place where experience really matters. And Mike Fugate had experience. Mike was 51 years old, 5'10", about 165 pounds, lean build. He had shoulder-length wavy gray hair, a gray beard, and wore eyeglasses. But more important than any of that, Mike was a hardcore outdoorsman. He wasn't some weekend warrior who bought a Patagonia jacket and called himself a hiker. Mike lived an unconventional life, kind of off-grid, fiercely independent. He had deep, first-hand knowledge of the Sierra Nevada. His family has described him as someone who was meticulous about his gear and his route planning. The kind of guy who respected the wilderness because he knew exactly what it could do to you. On this particular trip, he had done everything right on paper. He had filed a wilderness permit. He had declared his route. He had a firm return date. He was wearing sensible, if light, hiking attire, a faded blue t-shirt, olive or khaki shorts, and a faded red scarf. He set out on June 15, 2005, for a solo backpacking loop through the Hetch Hetchy backcountry, somewhere along the Pacific Crest Trail network. Nothing about his plan was reckless. Nothing about his profile suggested a person who was going to do something stupid out there. Within days, that storm rolled in. June 21st comes. That's the date on Mike's permit, the date he's officially supposed to be back and checked in at the ranger station. He doesn't check in. For most hikers, a late check-in might get shrugged off for a day or two. But Mike was the kind of meticulous guy who took these things seriously. When he didn't show up, the rangers immediately realized something was very, very wrong. The search operation that kicks off is huge. We're talking Yosemite search and rescue, tracking dogs, helicopters doing aerial sweeps of the backcountry, and eventually, and this is wild, the United States Marines. They get Marines involved because the terrain up there is so rough and so vast that they need the manpower. Ground teams grid the wilderness, covering mile after mile of remote alpine terrain. And for days, they find nothing. Then, finally, they get their break. Searchers find Mike's backpack. But here's where everything about this story tips sideways. The backpack wasn't on his declared route. It was located in an area that deviated significantly from the path he'd filed on his permit. So right away, that tells you something was going on. Mike, careful, meticulous Mike, had gone off plan, and the contents of that pack. That's what really haunts this case. The pack itself was just sitting there, not thrown, not scattered, not flung aside in a panic. It looked like it had been deliberately set down. Inside, investigators found his gear, sleeping setup, supplies, his stuff. But a few very specific items were missing from the pack. His camera was gone, his water bottle was gone, and his map was gone. And next to the pack, reports describe a half-eaten sandwich. A sandwich. Sitting there, with bites taken out of it, like he'd been right in the middle of eating it when he stood up and walked away. When searchers eventually developed the photos on his camera, because the camera itself was found nearby at some point in the investigation, the final pictures were of distant, snowy peaks, off-trail peaks, terrain that was nowhere on his permitted route, like he'd been looking out at some faraway mountainside and was documenting it, considering it, maybe planning to go toward it. But Mike himself? Nowhere. The backpack was the starting point for an enormous secondary search grid. Dogs worked the scene. Teams spread out in concentric circles from the pack. They searched and searched. Nothing. No body, no bones, no clothing, no dropped camera, no torn piece of that faded red scarf. No Mike. Okay. Let's actually think about this, because this scene tells a story. It just doesn't tell a story that makes any sense. The official theory from the authorities is basically this. Mike set up a temporary stash. He dropped his heavy backpack to scout ahead, maybe to check out one of those distant snowy peaks he was photographing, or to find a water source, or to get a better vantage point. While he was away from the pack, the snowstorm rolled in. He got disoriented in the whiteout conditions, couldn't find his way back to his gear, and eventually succumbed to hypothermia somewhere out there in the wilderness. That's the clean, rational explanation. And on the surface, sure, that sounds plausible. But here's the thing. Let's actually look at what Mike left behind, because the scene directly contradicts that theory in multiple ways. First, the sandwich. Let's talk about this because I can't stop thinking about it. You're an experienced backpacker. You're hiking deep in remote wilderness. You stop to rest and eat. You pull out a sandwich, you take a bite. What could possibly make you put that sandwich down and just walk away? Think about it. If you wanted to go scout something, you'd finish the bite in your mouth at minimum. You'd pack up your food before leaving it in the wilderness, where bears and other animals could easily come to it. If you saw something interesting, some view you wanted to photograph, you'd grab your camera and go look, maybe even while chewing, and come right back. You don't take one bite of a sandwich and then decide, you know what? I'm done with lunch, I'm going to wander off. Seasoned backpackers protect their food. They hang it, they bear can it. They are paranoid about leaving food unattended because unattended food in bear country brings bears. Mike knew this. He would have known this in his bones. Leaving an open sandwich on the ground is something a novice might do, not a veteran wilderness guy. Second, the bathroom theory. Some people have speculated, okay, maybe Mike just stepped away to relieve himself and something happened. Maybe he fell. Maybe he slipped on a loose rock. But here's the thing. You don't walk a quarter mile to go to the bathroom. You walk maybe 50, 100 feet. That's it. And searchers did grid search the entire area around the backpack. They had dogs working the scene from the exact location he was last known to be at. If Mike had slipped and fallen anywhere in the immediate surroundings, he would have been found quickly. He wasn't. Third, the missing items. This is the detail I find most interesting and most confusing. The camera, the water bottle, and the map were missing from the pack. Not everything, not random stuff, those 3 specific things. So what does that tell us? It tells us Mike didn't just step away for a moment. He deliberately took items. Navigation, hydration, documentation. That's the kit of someone setting out on a short, intentional excursion away from camp. He was planning to explore something and come back. Which means, for Mike, this wasn't a panicked flight or a random wander. This was a decision. He decided to leave his pack, take his essentials, and go look at something. Fourth, but then that creates a new problem. If Mike was an experienced backpacker and he decided to explore a treacherous, snowy, off-trail area, one he apparently thought was interesting enough to photograph, you do not do that with just a water bottle and a map. You don't leave your shelter, your food, your warm layers, and your emergency supplies behind in the forest while you go climb a snow-covered unknown peak. That's what rookies do. That's what tourists do. That's not what Mike Fiesery, the fiercely independent wilderness guy, does. He would have packed up. He would have taken his shelter. He would have taken his food. Because he knew, absolutely knew, that the Sierra Nevada in June could turn deadly in under an hour if a storm rolled through, which it did. Fifth, the dogs. Tracking dogs came in for this case and had a pretty solid starting point. A fresh scene, a backpack still with human odor on it. That should have been prime conditions to follow Mike's trail wherever he went after leaving the pack. They couldn't track him. The scent just ended. That's the kind of detail that veteran searchers remember for their entire careers. Dogs are incredibly good at what they do, and for a dog team to come up completely empty, starting from a known point, means something is wrong with the physics of how the subject left that spot. And finally, there are the fringe angles. Some people have floated that Mike, while exploring off-trail, stumbled onto an illegal marijuana grow operation. These were genuinely common in remote parts of the Sierra in the mid-2000s. Cartels would run grow operations deep in the backcountry, and armed workers sometimes killed hikers who got too close. It's a real phenomenon. And it would explain a lot: why Mike left his lunch abruptly, why he went off route toward something he'd seen, why his body was never found, and why the dogs lost the trail at a specific point. If someone armed intercepted him, carried him somewhere, and disposed of him, the trail would absolutely just end. I'm not saying that's what happened. I'm saying it's a theory that explains the evidence better than he got lost after stepping away from his sandwich. Mike Fiesery's disappearance remains officially unsolved to this day. Yosemite SAR never found him. His family grieved through a search that was as thorough as anyone could have asked for, with dogs, with helicopters, with actual Marines walking the high country, and still nothing. His sister reportedly even consulted a medium at one point, and the details that came out from that session apparently included specific, unpublished information about the search. Make of that what you will. I tend not to put stock in that kind of thing, but it's a measure of how desperate the family was for any answer, any thread to pull. And at the center of this entire mystery is a single, simple, haunting image. a backpack sitting alone in a quiet patch of Yosemite backcountry forest. A half-eaten sandwich next to it, the woods silent, the trees tall. A man's life, his gear, his food, his shelter, his plans, all just sitting there, paused mid-bite, waiting for him to come back and finish. And he never did. He stood up, took his camera, his water, his map. He walked off into the woods. And somewhere in those mountains, between one bite of a sandwich and the next, Mike Feisery stepped off the face of the earth. The forest kept him. The sandwich is long gone. The questions are still there. Here's a scenario for you. You're on vacation. It's your last day. You and your spouse are celebrating your 26-year anniversary. You've got a flight to catch in a few hours. The suitcases are mostly packed. The car is rented. The airport is waiting. You decide to squeeze in one last quick hike. 2 hours max. You want to get a few last photos of the wildlife. Your spouse stays behind at the hotel to finish packing. You promise you'll be back by 11 a.m. so you can grab lunch, check out, and drive to the airport. You grab your camera, you grab your backpack, you hit the trail, you never come back. Your wife, back at the hotel, waits. 11 a.m. passes, then noon, then 1 p.m. She drives to the trailhead. Your rental car is sitting there, exactly where you left it, but you're gone. And for the next 18 months, 600 searchers, 20 K-9 teams, and helicopters with thermal imaging are going to sweep the desert around that trail and find nothing. This is the case of Paul Miller. And what happened to him is a terrifying lesson in how fast and how completely the desert can swallow someone who takes their eyes off the trail for just a moment. Let's start with the location, because Joshua Tree National Park is one of the most deceptively dangerous places in America. Joshua Tree sits in the high desert of southeastern California, where the Mojave Desert meets the Colorado Desert, and it is stunningly beautiful. It's got those iconic gnarled Joshua trees that look like something out of a Dr. Seuss book. It's got these massive jumbled rock formations, boulder piles stacked on top of each other, sometimes hundreds of feet high, carved by wind and time into shapes that look almost sculpted. But here's the thing people forget. Joshua Tree is actively lethal in the summer. We're not talking uncomfortable, we're talking dangerous. Ambient temperatures in July routinely blast past 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The granite absorbs that heat and radiates it back, creating this oven-like effect that cooks you from multiple directions at once. There's almost no shade. There's almost no water. And the air is so dry that sweat evaporates off your skin instantly, meaning you don't even feel yourself getting dehydrated until you're already in serious trouble. And then there's the visual problem, because every boulder in Joshua Tree looks kind of like every other boulder in Joshua Tree. Once you step off a marked trail, the landscape becomes this endless, repeating maze. Your eyes can't find landmarks. The brain, which is used to orienting by distinctive features, just gives up. People have wandered off trails in Joshua Tree and gotten hopelessly lost within minutes, within just a few hundred yards. The specific trail in our story is the 49 Palms Oasis Trail. It's a popular, well-known hike, about 3 miles round trip, rated moderately strenuous. The trail climbs up a sun-baked ridge, then descends steeply into a rocky canyon. And at the bottom you find this beautiful fan palm oasis with clear pools of water tucked between the cliffs. It's the kind of view people drive hours to see, and Paul Miller wanted to see it one last time. Paul was 51 years old, from Guelph, Ontario, Canada. He and his wife Stephanie were vacationing in California to celebrate their 26th wedding anniversary. Paul was in genuinely good shape. He was an active guy, played hockey, baseball, and lacrosse. He was an experienced hiker, totally capable of handling a 3-mile desert trail. He was not a risk taker. He was not the kind of guy who goes off-trail looking for adventure. He was a reasonable, responsible, athletic, middle-aged family man who loved nature photography. His specific goal that morning was to photograph bighorn sheep at the oasis. That was it. Go to the oasis, get the photos, come back, catch a flight. It's the morning of July 13th, 2018. The final day of their trip. Paul tells Stephanie he wants to take one more quick hike, She opts to stay at the hotel and finish packing. He grabs his Osprey backpack, a purple and gray one, loads it with water and a camelback bladder, grabs his camera, and heads out. He pulls into the 49 Palms Oasis trailhead parking lot around 9 a.m. And we know he made it onto the trail because there are sightings of him. A tourist from England later reported seeing Paul resting in the shade of a rock about halfway down the trail. Everything was normal. He was hiking at a normal pace. Nothing seemed off. There's one other detail from that morning that becomes important later. A separate vehicle pulls into the parking lot shortly after Paul. 4 unidentified people get out. That's all we know about them. They're there, and then they're gone. Keep that in the back of your mind. Paul continues down the trail. His photos, recovered later, confirm that he made it all the way to the oasis. He got his shots, and he started the return trip, which, remember, involves climbing back up that steep ridge under the full desert sun. He never makes it back to the parking lot. 11 a.m. passes. Stephanie starts checking her phone. Noon. She calls the hotel. She calls Paul's cell. No answer. Finally, she drives out to the trailhead herself. She finds his rental car sitting there, totally untouched, exactly where he'd parked it hours earlier. She calls 911. The Park Service launches a massive response. Within days, over 600 search personnel are involved, 20 K9 units, helicopters equipped with FLIR thermal imaging, expert trackers working the trail. This is one of the biggest searches in Joshua Tree history, and it fails completely. The desert heat is so severe, it actively defeats the search technology. The dogs can't work. The ground is so hot it literally burns their paws, and the extreme heat destroys human scent trails almost instantly. The FLIR helicopters can't pick Paul out either, because the rocks have absorbed so much solar radiation that they're hotter than human body temperature. On thermal imaging, everything glows. There's no contrast. Paul, if he's out there, would look identical to every surrounding boulder. After 5 days of searching, they scale the operation back. Officially, Paul Miller is missing. In reality, the trail is cold. Then, in December 2019, about 18 months later, a non-profit drone group called Western States Aerial Search is analyzing over 10,000 high-resolution aerial photos of the area. They spot some anomalies, something that looks out of place in a remote ravine, far off the trail. They send the coordinates to rangers hike to the spot, and they find Paul, but not where anyone expected. Paul's remains are located in a remote drainage wash, far off the trail, heading northeast into rugged off-trail terrain. Nowhere near the oasis, nowhere near the parking lot, in a rocky crevice that required strenuous, dangerous climbing to reach. They find his Osprey backpack sitting upright, about 10 feet from his skull. His camera is inside, confirming he had reached the oasis. Nearby, his cargo shorts are buried beneath rocks and sand. A single military-style boot is found further down the wash. And inside the backpack, in the camelback bladder, somewhere between a half-liter and a full liter of water remains. Untouched. Okay, let's dig in. Because every part of this scene raises questions that don't have clean answers. The official theory is the most rational one. Paul, climbing back up the steep ridge under brutal desert heat, suffered a sudden medical emergency. Maybe a massive heart attack, maybe rapid onset heat stroke. His cognition collapsed. He became delirious. In his disoriented state, he wandered off the trail, maybe trying to find shade, and eventually crawled into a rocky crevice where his body gave out. On paper, that fits. Heat kills people in Joshua Tree. It happens every year. But there's a problem, and it's the biggest logic gap in the case. Paul had a flight to catch. He was on a clock. His wife was waiting for him back at the hotel, expecting him at 11 a.m. He knew he had maybe 2 hours total for this hike. That context matters enormously, because it means Paul was not in any mindset to wander. He was not going to see something interesting and detour for miles. He was operating on a tight schedule with real consequences. So how does a guy on a hard deadline end up in a remote ravine that required serious physical effort to reach? Okay, the photography theory. The idea is, Paul sees a bighorn sheep near the trail on his way back up. He steps off the path to get a photo. He walks a little further to get a better angle. And in the process, he gets turned around in that maze of identical-looking boulders. I buy part of this. Stepping off trail to chase a photo is exactly the kind of thing a nature photographer would do. But here's the thing. Where Paul ended up wasn't just a few steps off the trail. It wasn't a whoops, turned the wrong way situation. He was found in terrain that required climbing over jagged granite, descending into steep ravines, pushing through thorny desert scrub. That's not accidental drift. That's movement. That's effort. And the rule everyone learns about being lost in the desert is stay put. Find shade. Wait to be found. Don't climb deeper into inaccessible terrain. Don't go down into ravines where helicopters can't see you. Don't do the thing that Paul apparently did. Now, there is a medical explanation that might cover this. It's called paradoxical undressing, and it's a documented symptom of severe, late-stage hypothermia, but also, to a lesser extent, severe heat stroke. What happens is, the body's temperature regulation system gets so scrambled that the victim feels like they're on fire even when they might be cold, or feels convinced they need to burrow into a small, sheltered space even when they're already in a bad spot. Victims have been known to strip off clothing and crawl into crevices as they die. That actually fits a lot of the evidence here. The cargo shorts, found buried under rocks, could be paradoxical undressing. The location in a small rocky crevice could be burrowing behavior. The death with water still in the pack could be the final stage, cognitive collapse so severe that he literally couldn't figure out how to drink. But here's what still nags at me. Paradoxical undressing usually leaves clothes scattered, thrown aside, not buried under rocks. The deliberate burial of the shorts is unusual. It's possible that post-mortem animal scavenging moved them around, maybe coyotes digging in the sand. That's the official explanation. Maybe that's correct. And then there's the 4 people. I want to be careful here, because I don't want to build a conspiracy theory out of thin air. But it's a fact in this case that 4 unidentified individuals arrived at the trailhead parking lot right after Paul. They were never officially identified. Their whereabouts during the hike are unknown. Some researchers who have looked at this case have wondered whether Paul encountered these individuals on the trail, whether something happened, whether his off-trail wandering was actually flight from a confrontation. There's no hard evidence for foul play here. The coroner didn't find signs of trauma that pointed to murder. The physical evidence is most consistent with heat-related death, but the presence of those 4 unidentified people in the parking lot that morning is one of those unresolved threads that the internet won't let go of. And finally, there's the invisibility problem. Paul was found less than 2 miles off the trail. A helicopter with FLIR flew over that area during the search. 100+ trained searchers walked ridges nearby, and he was completely invisible to all of them. Because the desert was literally hotter than his body, because the rocks camouflaged him, because the dogs couldn't work the heat. That detail, more than anything, tells you how brutal that environment really is. Paul Miller's remains were positively identified in late 2019, over a year and a half after he vanished. His family in Canada finally got closure. His wife Stephanie, who had driven to that trailhead that July morning expecting to scold him for losing track of time, finally got to bring her husband home. But the answers Paul's case provides are cold comfort, because the story it tells is not a dramatic one. There's no kidnapping, no villain, no supernatural mystery. The story is just this: a reasonable, experienced, responsible 51-year-old man who wanted to squeeze in one last scenic hike on his last morning of vacation. He stepped off the trail for what was probably just a few minutes. He got turned around in a landscape of identical rocks. The heat hit him. His brain started misfiring. He walked into terrain where nobody could find him, and he died there, with water still in his pack. That's the terrifying thing. It's not that Paul did anything stupid. It's that the desert doesn't care. It gives you a 2-hour window to get your sheep photos and get out, and if you lose sight of the trail, even for a moment, even to chase one last shot, it doesn't give you that window back. And the image I can't shake from this case is the one at the very end. A man standing in the Joshua Tree sun, camera lifted, tracking a bighorn sheep through a long lens, his boots on sand, his backpack full of water he'll never drink, a flight waiting, a wife packing at a hotel. He lowers the camera. He looks up. The boulders around him look identical. The trail is somewhere, but where? And in that single moment of disorientation, just a few steps off the path, in the 100-degree desert with a flight to catch, the rest of Paul Miller's life is already over. He just doesn't know it yet.